Hello, I'm Monica Castillo, Arts and Culture reporter at Colorado Public Radio. I'm thrilled to be moderating today's Script to Screen panel for the Television Academy Foundation Faculty Seminar, the conference for the animated event Maya and the Three. Joining me today are creator, director, and executive producer Jorge R. Gutierrez, creative consultant Sandra Equihua, sequence director John Aoshima, and storyboard artist Kristal Babich. Let's get into how this beautiful epic came to the big screen. Kristal, I want to start with you. How did you first get involved with Maya and the Three?
Um, I first met Jorge when I was working on the Lego 2 movie. He happened to be working in the same building on a different project. And he showed us like early, like what he'd pitched and like kind of like some of the early art and the story. And I thought it was super cool. So I know like based on my name, I don't seem Latina, so I like made sure I was like before he leaves, I'm just gonna let him know just in case, like not expecting anything. And then like I almost like a year later, like once like Lego 2 was wrapping, he like slid into my Twitter DMs with a job offer, and I was like, absolutely, like yes, no questions asked.
The Twitter DM job offer. Classic. John, how about you? How did you start on Maya and the Three?
Well, for me, I've known Jorge since school. We were in the same animation class. And I was at a Google Shorts gallery showing, and Jorge approached me and said, "Hey, how do I find another one of you?" And I'm like, what does that mean?" He's like, "Well, I'm looking for someone that has both feature and TV experience." And and um, and so he was looking for another person because I was already tied on another project. And fast forward, that project I was on gets canceled at a studio. And then I run into Jorge again at a dinner. And he's like, "I'm so sorry that the project got canceled, but you're available now, right?" And then so I was like, "I guess I am." He goes, "Would you like to join my project? I would love to pitch what we have." And I never had a chance to work with him before, so I took the opportunity. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And Jorge and Sandra, what are the origins behind Maya and the Three?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask Sandra, like, how did you get the job too?
Oh, well, I gave him a child.
Yeah. So my it was an idea that I was like cooking for a while. Basically since Book of Life, I had this warrior princess idea, but originally it was 3 movies, and so no one wanted to let me make 3 movies. And then eventually, I wanted to make something to honor her, to honor sort of this rebel girl I met when we were teenagers in Tijuana. Sandra's dad is a doctor. Sandra's sisters all studied medicine, and she wanted to be an artist. And that's when I met her. So I was like, I fell in love with this rebel, and all the work I've done before was about male heroes and male protagonists. And you know, the world is changing. I said, if I want to help out, I need to honor all these warrior women that I have around me, and especially my mother and my sister and Sandra. And so it all kind of started combining. And then I'm a big lover of fantasy movies. And I realized there's no fantasy movies that look like us. I wanted what if the camera in Lord of the Rings went south, like, or Game of Thrones? Like, what did the people in my continent look like? And what were they up to? Yeah. So Maya is kind of a combination of all those things. And then the other big one was I discovered movies at home. So I discovered Seven Samurai at home. Honestly, I discovered Star Wars at home. And I discovered other countries by watching movies. So to me, I wanted Maya to feel like a kid somewhere else in the world just found this movie from Mexico, and they get to see the history and they get to see the fantasy of that other world. And maybe it'll lead them to wanna not only want to come visit, but want to learn more.
So using Maya and the Three as a sort of like open door to learn more about all these different things. And one of those things is all the different influences from Mesoamerica and Caribbean. And we'll get to that in a second. But this is where I want to ask Sandra about designing characters, because that's one of your specialties. Can you tell us a little bit about the journey of designing characters like Maya and Quinteca, for example, and the kind of inspirations that you drew from?
Well, yeah, the way Jorge and I usually work when it comes to his projects, I'm always on his projects. It's a pleasure working with him. And I'm not just saying that because he's my husband. He really is. He's a lot of fun to work with. But he technically kind of gives me an idea of what he wants. And we have a script beginning to flourish. So we sit down, and usually it's over like dinner or lunch, because that's when our brains work a little more. And we start going back and forth about what the character is like, because we need to know what the character is like before actually designing the person, right? So after that's done, I start doing my research about what might fit into the character description. And we were fortunate enough that we had like a cornucopia, a vast selection of different cultures to look at. And reference, yeah, it was just like eternal. We had so much, and it was so fun to look at everything, you know. And so I went off of that. I went off and looked at colors and textures and a lot of shapes and a lot of
I also have to say, like, I would doodle, like, here's what I think Maya should look like. And then Sandra would see it and go, ha ha ha, you ignorant fool.
No, I would not
Let
say
me
that.
show you. And then like beauty comes out of her.
No.
So I always say she takes my sketches and like fertilizer, uses them for these beautiful flowers to grow.
That's really nice of him, but no, that's not how it works. Technically is what I said. Yeah, that is true though. Like he does hand me these
His drawings are fertilizer.
these little sketches that are like just incomprehensible hieroglyphics, and then I'll be like, okay, I think I can go off of this. And then I cross my fingers, and then like I just start sketching out things, roughing it out, and then we back and forth. And I like to say that Jorge is of the school of more is more. I'm of the school of less is more. So we complement each other really well.
And I would say, like, when I'm writing and she's designing, like there's a lot of back and forth. So for example, early on in Maya, Sandra read her and went, what are you doing? Why is you're Mary suing her, right? Basically, you're making her too perfect. And all the men around her are so flawed that they're super interesting. Why aren't you making her just as interesting? And to me, it was that guilt, like that guilt that, oh, I haven't had a female protagonist.
Yeah.
So she has to fulfill all of this perfection. But she was absolutely right. It was, you are dehumanizing her. You're giving her one dimension.
Yeah.
Because I think the flaws in design
Makes
and
it
the
more
flaws in the character, those are the flaws that give personality.
Yeah.
And we talk about folk art all the time. The imperfections is what gives folk art its charm. So it really happened in the writing and in the design. How do we give them layers and not make them perfect, and imply that they don't need to fix the perfection? The perfection is actually a bad thing. The imperfection is what gives them a soul.
That's great. And I love that it's such a collaborative process between the two of you. Yeah, that's awesome. I would love to hear a bit more from John and Kristal about maybe your own individual research processes, because you were involved with different aspects of the production.
Kristal, please. I always want to offer to you first. Yeah.
Can I leave the witness? So Kristal is somebody who became a specialist on Maya of doing perhaps the saddest, most heartbreaking moments. She's somebody who is incredibly sensitive. And so the moment I saw her do that, I was like, we have a tragic prodigy on the team, and I will give her all that stuff. And Kristal did the ending to Maya. Basically, she closes the show. She did the beginning of Chini's episode, which is by fans considered one of the most tragic open. So just to leave you, Kristal, talk about that.
I just really like drawing, like, I don't know, it's just really fun to make people cry. Like, I think that's what it is, right?
Wow, you are the goddess, I swear.
Goddess of tears.
You have so many people crying right now.
I guess like in preparation for that, like I always approach anything that I board just always about the character. Like the cinematography is important and all that, but like for me, like that's really how you get to the center of anything. It's just like staying as true as you can to like this character so they feel like a person. Like and that's at least like how I approach like all the acting and things like that. In regards to like preparation, like Jorge did give us like a list of things like watch these and like so I definitely like watched all that. I even like on my own like read like a like not read but like listened to like a big audiobook on Mesoamerican like art and history and stuff just so like not because I thought it was gonna be like I was gonna be able to pull, but just to kind of get into the like feeling of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just things like that. Just get into the mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And John?
I mean, for me, you know, kind of touching back on how Jorge approached me, it was more about how do we take this concept, this idea that that's a limited series, but he wanted something that's big as feature, but you know, how do we provide or format this idea into a show? And so I came in with my background experience of like TV and feature to figure out a way to format it. One of the early things Jorge said was, like, I don't know how to title you because I'm obligated to be the contractually obligated to be the director. I want you on this project. We have a head of story. And so I suggested I can be a sequence director because it's a lot of story to tell, which means a lot of management with the army of story artists that we had to bring on to this project. We had our internal team, we had our outsourced story team from House of Cool, which is amazing. And so we had to figure out a strategy to tackle this endeavor. And then for my personal connection to this project, my mom has a business in Baja, Mexico. So ever since I was young, I would cross the border during summer vacation and stay with my mom quite a bit. So I had the iconography of the Mesoamerican, culture around me growing up. But I never, as I was like really inspired by it and intrigued by it, I never had the opportunity to really dive in. And so when Jorge came to me and said, "Well, since you're available, would you want to, come on board?" And I'm like, "Of course, this is my opportunity and to work with Jorge." So it was really exciting for me.
And I have to say, John is a big film nerd like me. And so, for example, John did the sequence where Satz shows up in the first episode, interrupting Maya's quinceañera. And I remember talking to him and I was like, this is Kurosawa, this is Sergio Leone.
You can totally see
like
that.
this is grand. We're going big, thousands of people, and then one person makes a difference. And with John, I would say that stuff and he would go, "Got it." And then I would see him for a while, and then the boards would show up. And I was like, "He did it! Leone Kurosawa had a baby."
Are there more titles or directors or sources of inspiration that you would recommend?
I mean, honestly, for Maya, for Maya and the three, I would say I was very overwhelmed with the research. Early on, when I started diving in, it became apparent to me that a lot of the myths or earlier myths are very male centric, and women tended to be the sleeping beauty or the witch
or airheaded too.
Yeah, not very smart, or the victim.
Yeah.
And so I think it's very important to understand that a lot of these are myths. So a lot of these myths are reflections of the views of the time, and while being respectful and acknowledging that history, we didn't want to sort of continue those ideas. So for us, it was very important to go, we know where it comes from, but we as artists, it's our duty to reflect the world we live in today. So we're going to acknowledge the past, but we're going to present you now. And so when people watch Maya and the Three, I hope this is a gateway into learning more about Mayan mythology and Aztec mythology and Caribbean cultures and the Incas, but at the same time, look at how people have interpreted it over time. For us, a big inspiration was the Mexican muralists doing their take on it. Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo paintings, Jorge González Camarena, all these, you can find all these artists online, but seeing people's interpretations of their history is what got us excited. Sure. We also looked at urban murals all over Mexico and especially Los Angeles and California and Texas. How are Mexican-American artists reinterpreting those times in a more urban way? So all those things became influences to us.
That's great. And I love that there's so many different kinds of influences and books, murals, movies, all in the mix. John gave us a little bit of an insight on to what a sequence director does, but Kristal, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what your job usually entails as a storyboard artist.
Well, I guess with like a storyboard artist, like you'll be assigned a sequence from the script, and you'll get launched with like usually your like sequence director and Jorge and the head of story and whoever else, like if anybody else like has things like that they can give you like art and things like that. But it's definitely like the launches with Jorge always really fun because he had like a very clear like emotion that he wants to like portray, and so like to me like that's great direction. Like that's always what I want to know, because like the rest of it is like really will come together once like what you want the audience and what these characters are feeling. At least when I storyboard like and I'm reading the script, I just try to find within that sequence like what's the most important moment in it, like what's the important message I'm trying to give, or what's the like pinnacle of the character arc in that moment, and then everything else kind of like leads up to that on either side. So I always like find those like parts in the sequence and then like branch out from there.
And I would also say that with Kristal comes from comic books. So
yeah.
So she has a degree in comics, right, Kristal?
Yeah.
So she's approaching things in a different way than usually people like John and myself who come from animation. So to me, it was always very intriguing to see how she thought. And then on My and the Three, the thing that I loved doing was the story team were literally the story team. So they would read the scripts and give me notes. They would watch all the animatics where we cut the storyboards to music and to sound, and they would give notes. So story was constant. And I remember specifically with Kristal, like her insight, which you just described, she would always give her notes as almost the character and would go, hey, in this moment, this happens to Maya, but shouldn't Maya do this because of this? And it was always very interesting to me because I would sometimes get lost in the scope of the story.
Yeah.
But Kristal would
POV from her, yeah.
give the point of view of the character. So incredibly, I mean, Kristal's amazing.
Kristal's the bomb.
John's great too, though.
John's amazing.
I love this, like all just like admiration across the board for each and every one of you. Jorge, aside from recruiting on Twitter and reaching out to old classmates, how else did you build your creative team?
I know it sounds really weird, but I went on Instagram. And
I want to say charisma.
No, well,
that too. Jorge has like charisma dripping out of his ears. So he's very, just as these guys down here, like they're like, he's very like, hey,
But I like working with people from different backgrounds, right? So I like people who grew up in a different way than me, that come from a different place, who are gonna see the thing with different eyes. Because if you just surround yourself with people exactly like you, I don't think your thing evolves. So I go out of my way to try to find different talent and different people of different ages, different backgrounds. And then I go on Instagram and literally look at artists doing the type of stuff that we are already doing.
Yeah.
And that's who I reach out to. And thanks to COVID, people can work from home. So we hired a lot of people who work from their home countries.
Sure, yeah.
And that was amazing. And then at the same time, it's hard for me to not fall in love with people like John and Kristal and want to work with them again. So I also wanted to work with people who worked on Book of Life and El Tigre. So I'm always trying to me, it's a big party. And like, I want to invite everybody.
That's what it felt like.
And how did you keep that party going through COVID-19 and all the challenges that presented?
Well, because of the nature of animation, artists already, a lot of them work remotely, and we work with a studio in Canada. And so we were working remotely with them. So honestly, we lost a day of production. That was it.
Yeah.
The thing that got really difficult was recording actors, because especially those first 5 months of COVID, people disappeared. Literally, they just disappeared.
Because nobody knew like how it was gonna continue.
Yeah.
So even us, I mean, we were scratching and we were doing things, and
In the closet.
we were in the closet, like we were in a literal closet, and Jorge and I had serapes and like
always on brand, by the way.
mattresses and like Luca's baby blankets. We're trying to do our best, trying to make a makeshift recording room. Everything was falling, like toolboxes were falling on us. It was just terrible. So I can just imagine why people were like not responding. Like they were like,
But I mean, at the same time, COVID did something that it allowed a lot of people, including myself, to not think about the pandemic. And it allowed me to like get lost in the work, and allowed me to, basically go on the journey with Maya. And the other thing that it did for me, this is super Mexican, but seeing that people, were dying really motivated me. I was like, what if I die? What if my family dies? I gotta make this something. I gotta make it count.
Certainly. And I hate to just shift gears, but John, how did working on Maya and the three kind of different from your previous experiences on other projects?
To me, going back to, someone with a feature and TV background, we knew this project was something different and special format wise, and the storytelling wise. And so it was, not only was it about how to format a production strategy to make this work in a way that it made sense to the studio, made sense to the budgetary, challenges. And I worked closely, I didn't work that much closely, but it's all Tim Yoon, our producer, that made the magic happen. I just suggested my opinions based off of my background experience. But, the difference is really, looking at it from, like, before I was in TV, I was an episodic director. So I controlled the whole episode. And with Maya, the stories were divided into 9 chapters. And it wasn't about having, episodic or chapter directors. It was about having sequence directors to help manage the story, and spearheaded by Jorge as the main director, and also an extra eye from head of story, Jeff Ranjo. And, from my role as a sequence director, it was really about, casting the sequence to the right, actually suggesting who we should cast a sequence to which story artist based on their strengths. And also coaching, I should say, guiding story artists that, even because it was handled like a TV format where it's almost episodic, right? So it was like reminding them that this is not TV, this is a feature. So I had to get them in their head, because there's a format difference on how you storyboard a scene. There's a lot of close-up and medium shot in TV sensibility, mainly because you're looking at a smaller screen at home. And for feature, because it's in theaters, the screens are larger, so you can get away with larger, wider shots. But we wanted to mix both of them, because the wider shots make the moments feel epic, and grand. And so it's about how to utilize those techniques into this story And so you get a full meal on both, both formats.
Definitely going to ask more about that film versus TV sort of hybrid. But I want to hear from Kristal about your experience. How was working on Maya and the Three different from what you've done before?
I always thought of it as like a perfect like mix because before I went to Lego 2, I had worked in TV but on like a stop motion like preschool show. So it was like this like great mix of like, oh, like the kind of like more concise timeline of TV, but still with like enough like time to think like in feature. And that you were allowed to do these like more expensive like cinematic shots that if you were on TV they'd be like, no, like stop. Like what are you doing? But you didn't also have to like belabor a scene like you might in feature where you're just like literally redrawing the same scene like 30 times like which would happen to me on Lego too sometimes. And it's not because there's anything wrong with it. It's just because it's like there's like a lot of moving parts that have to change. So it's just part of the massaging of a feature. So it's nice to like have that perfect hybrid of like you have time to think, but you also don't have time to overthink. And so I really enjoyed it. It was great.
Positive reviews all around.
Yeah.
Jorge and Sandra, I'd like to hear a little bit more about kind of, if you've worked on El Tigre, you've had the Book of Life, so that was a traditional feature-length film. What was your experience like working within that, 9-chapter sort of format, changing from the original plan of 3 films to more episodic, and how you built that out and kind of shift gears?
Should we start with El Tigre?
Well, having worked on El Tigre, our big, honestly, the big limitation was El Tigre, just like SpongeBob, had to be the same character at the end of every episode.
Mm-hmm.
So characters couldn't really change. And then on Book of Life, the big issue that I had was, for anybody who's seen Book of Life, I cut out an hour out of that movie. There was so much more story. And I like big movies. I like giant epics. So Maya was the best of both worlds in that I could tell the super long, giant epic.
Well, you can't say that because you also chopped off some of the
not as much.
Some of the ideas.
And then we got to tell, cold opens, which are backstories. So we got to tell all the backstories. And then we got to build and we got to do all these. Because again, when I watch, Seven Samurai at home with commercials on television, that was a 4.5-hour experience. So we're giving you that, but without the commercials. And then in binging, the way people consume things now, it's very different. So I love movies, but movies live forever at home, right? Regardless of what anybody says, a lot of people will discover, they don't have revival theaters everywhere in the world. So awesome. A lot of people will discover movies at home. And so for me, it was, I get to take advantage of the format, and I get to take advantage of if a kid or a family want to watch 3 a night, or they want to watch all 9 in one day, I can give them that. So that was incredibly liberating.
And honestly, it is epic. It is huge, but it doesn't feel like it is because and from a personal point of view, you get so submerged in the story and in the characters and the way everything's laid out, and that it's a eatable feast, it doesn't feel like you're swallowing an entire Thanksgiving dinner. It feels like you're digesting it really well, and it has a good rhythm. It doesn't feel overwhelming.
And it's at your own pace.
Yes.
Does it feel like it's a sort of maybe new age or era in animation with that sort of accessibility to binge or watch as much as you want and watch as little as you want?
I mean, to me, I keep saying this is the golden era of animation, not only in what's happening content-wise and what's happening with the formats, but I think the real reason it's a golden era of animation is because people from everywhere are finally getting an opportunity to tell their stories. And that wasn't the case 10 years ago. Definitely not 20 years ago when we started. I
mean, that's going back to what we were saying about El Tigre, like when I told them you want to start with that. Even prior to that, like we've been trying to integrate that idea, that representation. And now, fast forward to now, you know, like thanks to Netflix, thanks to the internet, thanks to different types of projects, you can actually see different representation from around the world.
And John, I want to hear a bit from you. We already heard from Jorge and Sandra how they kind of work together. Could you maybe walk us through, you know, some of the collaborative process on your end and on working on Maya and the Three?
Okay, so maybe yeah, I can start maybe from the beginning, how it all kind of came together. Early on, when I came on, I was probably one of the earliest people on, right? Probably
Yeah,
the
you're like
fifth
number
person.
4.
No way. Oh, cool.
And at that time, Jorge and Jeff Ranjo pretty much had sort of the map laid out on where the journey will go, and all the lands that they'll explore, and obviously the characters descriptions and who they might be. But what was great about this format too was it felt like a feature, because my TV experience as a director, episodic director, I come on board and they're like, okay, here's your script, it's ready to go. So you got to take it into boards and start producing it. And for me, it's always about catch up, especially on a new show. And I'm like, I need to know these characters more so I can find opportunities to like really emphasize moments or certain characteristics of the character. But on this project, because we were allowed to like really explore each chapter and like really dive into what each character's journey is, and journey, I mean, not just on this adventure journey, but their internal arc and the journey that they have to go through. And then how all that set up at the beginning of of Maya, the series, to how they'll all kind of come to sort of a realization of who they are. And then once that moment comes, and how does that tie in with the overarching narrative, right? And so it was really, really fun because it was a bigger story. And then feature, you explore all these backstories and things like that. And usually those are sort of like, they have to be like compacted and put aside, and you have to focus on a primary story, and you can only provide piecemeal out the main keys that will support the story along the way. But on Maya, you get to really dive in and really play with those other ideas that you can't really tell in a feature length. You have more screen time, so you can really dive into each character's wants and needs and the challenges that they face, and really watch them grow with them. And as you do that in the story, like, you become more invested in each character, and you have the primary protagonist of Maya, but you also get to explore how they complement her and why she needs them so much on her journey. And that early story development was really, really, you know, a great experience for me. And then to take that like sort of feature early start and story and then carry it through production was really fun.
And Kristal?
I guess can you reiterate the question? Because like
oh yeah, I know there's a lot of process, but I was asking about the collaborative process.
Okay, the collaborative process. I guess as like a storyboard artist, what's really cool is like once you have your like you start going on your scene, like you're just like surrounded by other like extremely talented board artists and storytellers, and so anytime you're stuck, you could literally just like knock next door and next office and be like, hey, will you come look at this? Or like, hey, can I talk to you about this scene? And like, is this character working? Or and Jeff, our head of story, is just like so great to like bounce ideas off of, and all the sequence directors also super helpful, like because they know the story like so well because everybody's so collaborative. I don't know, and we were all kind of just like stupid, like ridiculously, like kind of in love with each other. Like we still like all have like a massive group chat and stuff. Like I don't know, we were all like, can we just get hired as a team like forever? So it was just like extremely collaborative in like the best way. I don't know how else to describe like the.
I mean, yeah, we were really inspired by each other, especially, you know, I don't know, the environment that the production and Jorge provided for Maya. It just and I think it had to do with, I think Jorge wanting to hear voices, like hear our opinions, like truly and honestly, like you know, he really wanted to hear our opinions. Usually, you know, as artists, as storytellers, we're like protective, and they're like, you don't understand what I'm trying to make, you know, just hear me out or just do what I'm telling you. But he's like, no, I want to know, because I want these specificities and what how you connect to these characters, and so we share, and we're and the environment that allows us to like really open up and feel like we're not going to get beaten down for saying something wrong, you know, like that allowed us to open up in a freer way. And then once that happened, you also saw everyone's like really thoughtful take on an idea, or just little added details that can enhance a character or a story. So we really took opportunities of that and really, you know, found ways to like incorporate it, because in the end, it was all about the project. We were very passionate about the story, and knowing that, you know, the team trusted each other and relied on each other really helped us, you know, enjoy the process. Another thing about TV and feature difference is that TV moves too fast, in my opinion, especially daytime TV, and feature has more time in it, and it requires more more thoughtful, you know, planning and all, and maybe some exploration. But sometimes it forces you to second guess your instincts, and sometimes you lose some spontaneity with that. And so having a hybrid production allowed us to stay on track, but have a little more breathing space. And I think having that space and having being able to be heard and collaborate really closely, that's what I think the experience that I look back to of being one of the greatest, you know, highlights of my career, to be honest. Like it's a really fun project.
Yeah, and like Jorge was really generous with like letting you just go into any meeting you were interested in. Like he let me sit on editorial things and art things just because I was interested to like learn more, and he was super cool about it.
I think just I'd like to add really quickly that I think that one of the common denominators to make a good production and a good product at the end is good chemistry within the crew. You know, because if you have just a lot of negativity and, you know, a lot of bad stuff going on, it's just not going to wield a good product in the end. And like John and Kristal just said, that openness leads to like, oh, okay, you're listening to me. There's a back and forth banter. And I can also say that about Jorge, although with him and me, it's a little bit different. More door slamming. And
you know, I will say the story of Maya is what happened behind the scenes, right? Like basically people came together from different places and they did something great, and then they sacrificed a lot for the greater good. But during a difficult time, very difficult time, and those bonds and that heart and that passion came through in the show. Yeah. So, you know, we always talk about whatever we're making, that's what happens behind the scenes.
Oh, wow. What an epic adventure then. I also really appreciate it. I think every creative person can appreciate like that need for openness and that need to like, you know, express maybe a thought or like, let's take a risk, let's try this, and like being receptive to it. But it's not the environment that everyone finds, but it's good to hear anytime that that's still out there. I wanted to hear, oh, real quick, Jorge, how many people were involved overall? That's like a rough number who were involved with Maya and the 3.
I would say roughly about 400 people. I would say maybe 50 in the US, and then everybody else in different parts of the world, mostly in Canada.
Wow. It's a small army, essentially.
Yeah, and you know, it's one of those things where, again, working with talent from different parts of the world, it was fascinating to see How would somebody from Japan approach this? How would somebody, from Russia approach this? It was just fascinating. It was incredible. The crew was incredible.
I bet probably different animation styles and ideas as well. I also wanted to ask very quickly, I know Jorge kind of touched on this a little earlier on, but I'd like to hear from Sandra, John, and Kristal if you had any more thoughts about, Maya and the Three is this incredible example of representation, both on screen and behind the scenes. So what kind of emotions does that bring up for you to kind of now see this out in the world and seeing people respond to it?
Kristal?
All right, I'll go first. I think my favorite part about it was that you very rarely get a Latina character in most animation. There's some and most of them are from Jorge, so there isn't that many in the world. But it was really just fun to get to have so many different kinds. They weren't all one note. They weren't just all the one spicy whatever. It wasn't that. And that you could just draw so many different Latinas and Latino characters, and they're all weirdos, and that was so much fun. And that I could actually use oh, how would I react if my dad did this? Add those little things of just things that you wouldn't get to draw in more, I guess, mainstream things, reactions of a daughter elbowing their dad. That to me feels very I would do that to my dad, but you wouldn't really necessarily draw that in mainstream animation, maybe.
Yeah, for sure.
And John?
I mean, for me, even though it's, culturally specific, well, one, the world is really fascinating, so it already draws me in. And just even though it's culturally specific, it has a universal message or similarities to situations and what you have to do, and maybe question your own life. And from my personal connection was I was thinking about the cast and the characters. And I was like, who do I relate with? Who do I connect with? And I felt like I connected with Chimmy because Chimmy was an outcast because she looked different. And for me, I was born in Japan and came to the US. And so I felt like an outsider. I looked different. At the time I didn't speak English, so I talked different, right? And so I was like, okay, and it really made me think about that connection, and then watching her journey, right? And then how she takes part in this bigger story and follows Maya. And so there's all these things that will help me kind of relate and connect, and I think that's really great to see that. And it questions me as a storyteller to be like, what can I do if Jorge can do this with his background, cultural background? I'm inspired and challenged with how can I do this? How do I beat Jorge? This is my new challenge.
I think you did, John. In many ways, yeah.
Oh, beat me, John.
Sandra, any thoughts on that?
How can I put this? In the time that I've had the joy and the luck to have worked in different projects and seen different projects of our contemporaries, I feel like the ones that get most to my heart are the ones that are more personal. And going back on what John was saying, this, regardless of the fact that it was culturally focused on certain things, it has a universal meaning, but it also has a lot of heart to it that can be enjoyed by everyone. And it's a personal thing. All of us, I think, related to different characters in different ways. And I think that that's what makes a great project, a great movie, a great cartoon, a great short, whatever it may be, the more personal it is, the more it's going to get to you, the more it's going to stay with you in your head. I think a great project will stay with you forever in your head. You'll just be walking down the street or driving, and all of a sudden, bang, it'll pop into your head. Unless it's really, really bad, then you'll be like, dang, that was a really bad movie. And then I'm going the opposite direction, right? But what you don't want to be somewhere in between where everything just kind of blurs. It's
Like,
true.
where you going with this?
It's true. I watched Stinkers and I'm like, whoa, what were they thinking? And you learn from that, right? You grow. But anyway, going back to what I was saying, oh my God. Don't. Yeah, you lost my train of thought. Oh my God. Well, that's what I was saying. Thanks, Jorge.
That's okay. I'll put Jorge on the spot for the last question.
Oh my gosh.
You're an alum of the Television Academy Foundation's internship program. What advice would you have for any of the students in the audience?
So I applied to the Academy Foundation when I was still in college, and I had an internship working on Stuart Little, the movie with a little CG mouse at Sony, and it changed my life. It was the first time, and I tell the story all the time. My first day at Sony, I got there an hour early because I was so excited, and I went to the cafeteria, and the cook, when I ordered my breakfast, yelled at me and said, "Janitorial services were supposed to be here an hour ago." And that was a moment. That was one of those moments where I said, "Wow, people who do this don't look like me." So I'm not going to get angry at this guy. I'm going to change his mind. And I need to change everybody's mind and be better, right? That's revenge of success. So it changed my life. I worked super hard, and slowly, I think being given that opportunity, being given honestly, the privilege to get to see a movie and get to see a show and get to see people working on it, it allowed me to dream, and it allowed me to go, if they can do it, I can do it. And for me, that's always been a very important part of representation. It's the characters being from different parts of the world and being from different ethnicities is important. But when you look behind the camera and you look at the people who are making it and they look like you, that allows you to go, I can do this. And the stuff in front of the camera, if the heroes aren't representing people that look like you, after a while, that takes its toll, because you start questioning and going, are people like me not supposed to be heroes? Are we just not meant for this? So I think that's why it's so important in front of the camera and behind the camera. And I think all of us, hopefully, we are an example for the next generation. And if we could do it, you guys can do it.
Thank you, Jorge, Sandra, John, and Kristal for your time today and sharing more about the making of Maya and the Three. To the Television Academy Foundation audience, thank you for joining us. Maya and the Three is streaming now on Netflix.